Okay, I'll take up a new topic today, the security concept in the HANA database. So when we are speaking about security here, as usual, we have options available here for you. You can create users, grant the privileges, all that can be done. But you need to understand, first of all, at which level you need to maintain the security, and that too in different scenarios. So that's very, very important. Because if you don't have clarity on this, at which level you need to maintain security, always there is a confusion for you. There's a big confusion. So to overcome that, first of all, just try to understand the concept of maintaining security. So basically the three scenarios you need to consider. So first one is data mart scenario. Well, all the scenarios I explained you earlier at the beginning itself. This is called data mart scenario. So what you do in this data mart scenario, you set up HANA database, then replicate data from different sources into HANA database using some replication technologies. And then once data is replicated, you build data models. On top of the data models, you go for reports. So in this particular scenario, you can see that end users are connecting to the HANA database. So as they directly connect to the HANA database, definitely you need to maintain security even for the end users also. Along with the security, you need to maintain for the technical people and administrators. So that's what is mentioned here. You can see that end user have direct access to HANA, and user and role management also required for end users along with the technical people and administrators. Anyhow, they'll suggest to go with even encryption also. See, the second scenario is a classical three-tier architecture scenario. In this case, you're running application on top of HANA, like you're running ERP, you're running CRM, any of the applications like that. So here, no end user is going to directly connect to the database. You know that you take ERP application, the users always connect to the application, not to the database. Even developers also their work at the application level. So basically, in this situation, the same security model for user access applies as with other databases. When suppose you are running ERP with Oracle database, whatever the security model you follow there, the same model you follow when you are running that ERP on HANA database. That's the meaning of that. So user and role management is required only for administrators. The administrators who are responsible for doing some admin activities at the database level. Third one, native HANA applications, which I explained you at the beginning itself. Those applications which are running on Access Engine of HANA database. So in this particular case, as you have Access Engine within HANA only, so when these users want to access those applications, or applications running within HANA on top of Access Engine, you need to maintain security at the database itself. And your HANA security model, access security model is it's, directly integrated into HANA security. So you create user in the HANA database and provide the required privileges there. But one of the challenging thing in this case is you should allow the user to access the application which is running within the database, but don't allow him to access the database objects directly. So that's one of the biggest challenge, but that actually they simplified it in SAP HANA. Okay, so these are the three different scenarios you come across in any organization. So based on that scenario, you try to maintain the security in any company. So that's the first thing which you need to understand. It's not just every situation you create users in the database. And then another important thing is the user access channels also you should know. So the communication from your application servers to the database happens using JDBC or ODBC. From HANA Studio, JDBC, ODBC. From the browser, it's HTTP communication. Because this will be really helpful for you to restrict the access based on that communication protocols. So particularly in the third scenario, here in this case, you can allow the user to access or connect to the database using that HTTP and restricting the JDBC ODBC. So that he can't use HANA Studio or anything else, you just directly connect to the database. So that's how this will be helpful for you. Now, when we speak about having a user, then granting privilege to the users, look at this diagram. So a known user, named user, can log into the database. So generally, users will have their own objects, some of those objects. I'll show you. When, for example, when you create a normal user, there is a schema created. So basically, he will be the owner of the schema. And then apart from the objects he owns, we also need to grant the privileges. So we can grant the privileges to the user directly. Or you can use the role concept also. What is the role is basically a collection of privileges. Okay, so we'll see all of them. So let us go to this database. You want to create a user, you want to grant the privileges to the users. So you can do it either by using this HANA Studio, we can use a skill statement, or even you can do it by using that web ID, web development workbench also we can use. Okay, so first let us see how to do it from this HANA Studio. So go to the database, security. Under that we have users, roles. Yes, there are some default users. Here you can see these are all some of these users. And for as an administrator, the default user is system user. And apart from that, you can create other users also. Say, right click on this users, click on new user. See, there are two options. One is new user, another one is new restricted user. First, let us start with the normal user. Give some name. User 1 is already there. I'll create user 2. So here you can see that disabling JDBC ODBC access available. You want to restrict the user not to connect to the database using JDBC ODBC options, you can do that. And then authentications. So first we should authenticate the user to connect to the database. Many options you have. Their default is password, and apart from that, many options you have there. Like you can use options like security assertion markup language, logon tickets, Kerberos, all these things. So depending on the interest of the customer, you can use them. And in your security guide, there is a security guide available in help.sap.com. There you can find the configurations which you need to perform depending on the option you are choosing. And then we have validity here from to. Valid from valid to option. It is just, sometimes what happens is you'll have guest users. For a temporary time period, you want to give a user ID, then you specify that from date to date. Otherwise, default what happens is only from will be there. and this valid until is blank. And there is also something called session client. When we connect to your SAP applications, you have the client, same thing. So the client number you can specify so that that end user will be able to access that specific selected client data. So that's the purpose of that. And I'm not granting any privileges to this user. Without granting the privileges, I'm just clicking on this deploy. See what happens. User is created. I did not enter that initial password. It's just only initial password and force password change on the next logon. There is an option. You can decide on that. If that is default checked, meaning of that is compulsory user need to change the password the first time when you log in. So let us see what happens when this user is created. Just give me a minute. Just a minute. Just 1 minute. User created. But we did not granted any privileges as such. But if you look at the granted roles here, you can see that default there is a role granted. That's called public role. Any normal user will have this public role granted. And apart from that, one more thing, one more observation if you see here, you have object privileges and there is some object privileges also granted. So the point you need to remember here is, so whenever the user is created, there is a schema created. When a normal user is created, there is a schema created. So that schema, basically, he is the owner of that schema. That's why you observe he's having that create any privileges in that schema. Generally we use the term user schema. That's what user schema is. So let us log in with that user, same system, right click on this database, add system with a different user. And what are the initial, sorry, there's a user. What are the initial password you given? Just enter that. So you have to, it's forcing the changing of the password. New password. And now it's connected. So for a normal user, without you grant anything, automatically privileges are granted and you'll be able to log in. But he can't do everything, but some default privileges you have, like that schema privileges and all. Is a user too. Like if you go to this catalog, all general public schemas are accessible to him along with his own schema. But this user two schema, if you observe, even system can't access it. Look at that. You don't have it. So I'll just show you what kind of permissions he's having. When he's saying he's the owner of this schema user too, he can do anything. He can create the table like this. See, he's able to do what? He can insert the data into the table, update, delete, all these things he can do because his own schema. But as I mentioned, even system user doesn't have access to this data. First of all, that schema. So then in case if any other user want to access this table, this data, anything, it's a user too who should grant those privileges. So when you want to do that, you can just use a SQL statement, you can do that. Otherwise going to these users, he can grant the privileges on his own objects to this user, system user. We'll come to this, what are the different types of privileges I'll explain, but I'm just showing you how it works. So you can give it on the table, all the schema. I'm just granting only select. See what happens. Once the permissions are granted, let us go to system user here. Go to catalog, refresh catalog. Now you should find that schema. Under the schema, only that particular table access we have given. And that too only for selecting the data, reading the data. Like this. But He can't do anything else because we are limiting those privileges. If you try to delete data, he can't do it. Insufficient privileges. So every single activity you want to perform in a HANA database, you need privileges. So the point what you need to remember is whenever a normal user is created in HANA database, default public role is granted to him. Apart from that, there is one schema created. So that user will be the owner of that schema. Now, in case if you create restricted user, how different is that to creating a restricted user? So let us look at an example on that. Going to security. New restricted user. Say I'm naming as our user 2. For restricted users, this ODBC, JDBC is disabled. Then I'm just giving the initial password. That's it. I'm not granting anything, no privileges. But what you can observe here is when you create this restricted user, no role is granted to him. And if you go to Object Privileges tab, even that schema is not there. And the two we are saying JDBC, ODBC is disabled. So he can't connect from HANA Studio because from HANA Studio connection to the database is using JDBC, ODBC options on it. So it won't detect this user at all. It won't recognize that user. Invalid username and password it's saying. But if you try to access this through browser, it will work because the browser that user access channel I shown you, that's HTTP. Then it won't give you this message. Anyhow, you should have that privileges to access some kind of application through browser. But just observe or HANA 8000 IDE. I'm just trying to access IDE. So here if I try with the R user 2, with that initial password. Initial password. This database, some problem is there. The system user is not working there. Okay, this database, let me show you HANA PRD, that is 07. That's 8007. Or user 2, initial password. See what it's asking. So you change the password. And here we should have those authorizations to access this application, Web IDE. As it doesn't have forbidden message, you are getting. But once, if I grant that IDE related role here, like IDE developer, editor developer, or something like this, now see what happens. But this user, he can't log in with HANA Studio. No way. So system doesn't allow this user to connect to the database using JDBC or DBC communications. So it says invalid user. So that's a major difference which you need to understand between normal users and restricted users. So the point what we have to remember here is this restricted user should be used, sorry, in this third case, in this one. So because here from this client, any web-based application you're accessing only HTTP connection. So you won't access the database, you'll access the application running on Access Engine. So that's a perfect and simplified option given to you. It's pretty easy. So now you can also, if you have the permissions, you can also create users from here, from security here. So he doesn't have that permission. So ID roles security admin will do. See that he's able to access. You can also access this directly. I mean, it's not that you need to go to ID then security. You can just use this URL directly. Hostname colon that port number. Port number is HTTP port 80 then instance number slash SAP slash HANA slash IDE slash security. So in that particular situation, this is not needed. This editor developer is not needed. Even if you don't have, still it works. And you'll also be able to create users from here, roles from here. Same thing, same process. So there's nothing different as far as you perform the activities are concerned. But generally when you have HANA Studio, we don't rely on this much. And even in Cockpit 2.0, if you are using, so when you go to the database, you just come down here, you'll have that managing users and all that. From here also you can. Roles option is there, assigning roles and all. A slightly different screen they're given in the new versions here. As part of the administration they're giving. Earlier it used to be part of that ID security and all that. So if you click on this plus button, you have that create user, restricted users. Okay, so this cockpit you can use directly go to that ID slash security. There you can do, or you do it HANA Studio. or even just write SQL statement, create user, username. Those statements also you can write, which are given here if you want to use it. Like this, create user, username, password, specify the password. Okay, so that's the concept of creating users. Then now we need to understand what is privileges concept is, what type of privileges you have, and significance of each and every type of privilege. So depending on the roles of these users you're creating, maybe end user, maybe a technical person like developer, modeler, maybe an administrator, depending on their roles and responsibilities, you need to grant the privileges to. Either directly or by using the roles concept. I'll explain the roles separately. Next class we'll see that. Then you see this one by one. We'll discuss on this. First, let us start with the types of privileges. You have SQL privileges, object privileges, analytic, package, application privileges. The last one is not type of privilege. There is an option there. The first one in this system privileges. As the name itself is suggesting, basically these are the privileges which are applicable at the system level, the entire database level. So mostly these are privileges related to administrators, almost everything. So you can see that these are system-wide privileges that control some general system activities mainly for administrative purpose. Like if you remember when I explained you about backup, I shown you that like backup admin, backup operator. You don't take a backup of one object, you take a backup of database. Similarly, read catalog, create users, user admin, role admin, all these things. If you click on this plus button, all the system privileges will be displayed there. So you don't have anything else other than this. System privileges are only this. So it's pretty easy for you to grant system privileges to the users. You just need to select that privilege and grant it. So big list we have there, which include user admin and all that. Like example, this user 2 here, you can see the users and all, but he can't create users because he need that admin privilege, system privilege. So if you grant it to the user, he can do that. So I'm granting it here, user admin. So once that user admin is granted, now see he can create the users like this. So these are basically the privileges which are applicable at the database level, or the system level. Okay, so similarly you have other types of privileges. I'll explain you one by one. These are simple things actually, but if you want to understand analytic privileges, package privileges, these two, a little bit of the modeling concept you need to know. So how they develop the models, all that. Even though it's a modeler or a developer responsibility, but knowing that will be really helpful for you to understand this concept in a better way. So tomorrow I'll show you one practical example on that, how a modeling user is created, and then once a modeling consultant logs into the database, how we create the models. So those concepts I'll explain you with a practical example. And then it becomes easy for you to work with those privileges also. So those things we'll take it up tomorrow.